Welcome to the Killer Author Club. 3 best-selling authors talking about killing, of the fictional kind, with the best thriller and suspense authors in the business. Killer conversations, killer cocktails, and killer guests, with your hosts, Kimberly Bell, Heather Gutenkopf, and Kara Ruda. This is the Killer Author Club.
Hello, and welcome to the Killer Author Club, your favorite haunt for all things murder, mystery, and mayhem. Tonight, we are so excited to welcome brothers in killing, Lee and Andrew Child, to the Killer Author Club hot seat to talk about the 20th installment in the Jack Reacher saga, Exit Strategy. So buckle up and get ready to kill the lights. I'm Killer Kimberly Bell.
I'm Killer Lee Child.
I'm Killer Andrew Child.
I'm Killer Heather Gutenkopf.
And I'm Killer Kara Ruda.
We have a whole group here tonight. But before we dive in, a couple of quick PSAs. Tonight's show will be available this Friday as a podcast, including bonus content just for listeners. Find all the links at killerauthorclub.com. And while you're there, make sure to sign up for our newsletter so you are the first to hear all of our killer breaking news. And now, Heather, would you please introduce our guests?
It would be my honor. Lee Child is the author of 25 New York Times best-selling Jack Reacher thrillers, with 16 having reached the #1 position, and the #1 best-selling complete Jack Reacher story collection, No Middle Name. Foreign rights in the Reacher series have sold in 100 territories. A native of England and a former television director, Lee Child lives in New York City and Wyoming. Andrew Child, who also writes as Andrew Grant, is the author of Run, False Positive, False Friend, False Witness, Invisible, and Too Close to Home. Child and his wife, the novelist Tasha Alexander, live on a wildlife preserve in Wyoming. So Lee and Andrew, can you tell us what Exit Strategy is all about?
Well, first of all, it's not the 20th, it's the 30th.
Oh,
30th Reacher title. And so that was, a huge thing. I started this 30 years ago, and it's still running with one extremely important junction along the way, which was that Andrew writes them now. I did 24 full-length novels myself, and Andrew is doing the next 24. And so here we are at number 30, so that when we talk about Exit Strategy, I have to let Andrew talk about it because he wrote it. It's his book. I've read it, and damn it, I was annoyed. I thought, that's just as good as me.
So good.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Lee. And thanks for that lovely introduction as well, Heather. So, Exit Strategy, it was a big responsibility. Funnily enough, when I started working with Lee on these books, 25 is a nice round number, 26, 27, but there was something about number 30 that just seemed really significant. And, I really wanted to come up with something that the readers were going to enjoy. So I think what we have is really a classic Reacher. It opens up. He's not in a small town in this adventure. This is one where he's in a city. He's in Baltimore, and he's gone there because there's a band playing that he wants to see, and he arrives in the city a little bit early, so he goes for a cup of coffee as you'd expect him to do, and there's a sort of fun incident at the coffee shop where Reacher spots some bad guys trying to take advantage of some older people. So he steps in and puts a stop to that. But in the whole process, it turns out that somebody else has slipped a note into his pocket, which he only finds later in the day. And so he's fascinated because, first of all, who would have the skills and the fieldcraft to be able to slip a note into Reacher's pocket without him noticing at the time? And secondly, this note seemed to suggest that the guy was in trouble. So, Reacher, he has a hard time walking away from anybody who's in trouble. So he decides he's going to look into it. He's going to see what the situation is, see if he needs to intervene and help this guy. And of course, it turns out that he does. And he uncovers something that, when it comes to the villain, I'd love to hear what everybody thinks about that, because villains are really hard in Reacher novels. Because Reacher is so big, so strong, so good at fighting, so good at figuring out puzzles. How do you come up with a villain who is worthy of him, and who is kind of, if you like, creepy enough or obnoxious enough to really push Reacher's buttons and make him determined to stop the person at any cost? And I think we came up with something in this one where the guy, he's without giving too much away, he's not physically intimidating, he's not physically menacing. But I think what he's doing, I think his, the enterprise that he's wound up in, I think is one of the most kind of grotesque and disgusting ones that we've ever done. So I'd love to hear what people think about that.
Well, we loved it. So readers, we want you to get chatty and drop your questions for Lee and Andrew in the comments. But first, Carol, what are we drinking?
Uh-oh, she's frozen. Oh no! Oh, there she went.
Whatever it was, it must have been good.
Whatever it was did the job.
Well, I'll take over then until Kara comes back. So we have 2 drinks tonight. Lee and Andrew have each chosen something different. First up, we have Lee's choice, which is the Salty Dog. Lee, please tell us why you chose that as tonight's killer cocktail.
I'm a terribly unsophisticated drinker. I don't really mind what I drink, but I remember when I worked in TV, we had, after a few years of working there, they opened a bar basically on the campus where the station was, which is a terrible thing to do in TV, because that is, in fact, when I started in TV, it was in Britain, and there was a regulation that stated a new entrant to a job had to be given all kinds of information by, the HR department, or personnel, as they called it back then. And one of the pieces of information you had to be given was the most common disease amongst the workforce in that industry. I assume so that you could take pains to avoid it or whatever. But I remember being told the disease in this business is alcoholism. And so opening a bar on the campus was probably not a good idea. And I was basically a wine drinker, really, mostly, but I developed a taste for this cocktail, which was grapefruit juice, which I really like anyway, salt around the rim of the glass, and a huge, huge slug of vodka in it. And that would get me through the first 20 minutes of the lunch break.
So good.
Amazing. And Andrew, you've chosen the Pisco Sour as your killer cocktail. Tell us about that special poison.
Yeah, well, before we get to the cocktail, it's interesting hearing Lee talk about his work experience, because the first, if you like, real job that I had, it was working for a big telecommunication company in the UK. And similar thing, there were 15 of us all recruited together to go into this kind of fast track graduate entry program. And we had to go on a week-long orientation course where similar things happened. The HR people showed up to tell us all about the rules and regulations. So here were 15 people, not long out of college, all looking for any opportunity to enjoy themselves. And up gets the HR fella who tells us all about how strict the company is, how anything to do, any impropriety is frowned upon. It will lead to instant dismissal, drinking, anything like that is completely forbidden. And we were all sitting there thinking, God, what did we sign up for? This is terrible. How do we get out of this? But then I think he was sort of midway through the afternoon. So probably 2 or 3 hours later, after the course is finished, we're in the bar. He shows up, and before long, this same guy who was lecturing us was so drunk that he was lying, trying to crawl under a table. So, we thought to ourselves, well, maybe it's not going to be such a bad place to work after all. But the drink I chose for the show, the Pisco Sour, is really because I find often where your enjoyment of a drink and your memories of a drink really stem from where you were when you first had one, or where you. And so I had been on a fantastic trip to South America, in fact, to the Galapagos Islands with Tasha and with my 2 daughters and one of their boyfriends. And one of the drinks that's really popular. You have to go to Ecuador first in order to get to the Galapagos Islands, and one of the drinks that's really popular there is the Pisco Sour. And so really, not only is it that it tastes so great, the flavor is incredible, but it's is really evocative. It brings back that whole experience. And the thing about it is it's actually a really difficult drink to make. It involves all kinds of different ingredients and shaking things to, precise, measure, degrees of mixture. And that's not the kind of thing certainly not the kind of thing I want to be doing at home. That's far too difficult. So if you're somewhere where particularly on the ship, when we were going around the Galapagos Islands, the barman on the ship, he was just an absolute expert. And these things were just so delicious. So really that combination of the deliciousness of the drink, the memories of where I first encountered it really, come together for that one.
I love that. Well, cheers, guys. I don't know if you're drinking them now, but cheers.
Now I have coffee, so.
Yeah. All right. So we created the Killer Author Club so readers could get up and close and personal with their favorite thriller writers. This season's lineup is stacked with killers: Jilly McMillan, John Mars, Jenna Bloom, our very own Killer Kara, and so many more. For dates, times, past episodes, and our Killer 2026 lineup, surf to, guess where? killerauthorclub.com. But tonight, it's all about exit strategy. In case you've been hiding under a rock somewhere and are not already familiar with Jack Reacher, here are some of the glowing praise about the series. One of this century's most original, tantalizing pop fiction heroes, that's according to the Washington Post. The Atlantic says you need Jack Reacher. And NPR says the Reacher novels are easily the best thriller series going. So clearly, Lee and Andrew, you are both killers of incredible skill and daring. And now we need to know your answer to the killer question: who do you kill?
Well, that's, you're asking for an on-air confession there, which would be, I'm fascinated. I'll tell you what I kill that that impresses me the most, simply because of how. For a long time I lived in New York City, where you could have, I did have a tremendous apartment in a luxury block worth, I'm not even going to say what it was worth, horrendous sum of money. But it had cockroaches, like everywhere in New York. And so I found that if I saw one, I would kill it, but I would do it without my conscious brain being engaged at all. The speed of the action was such that I knew that this was not a thought forming in my mind. This was not a decision I was taking and then executing. It was a pure reflex, literally a fraction of a second. See it, bang, dead. And that really fascinated me, that we carry with us this kind of deeply atavistic and right in the back of our evolutionary brain. We carry the instinct to do that. I could not have prevented myself from doing it. It was a completely automatic reaction from deep down in my lizard brain from millions of years ago. And I was fascinated by that reaction. And then what is it, in fact, that stops us from doing that to other things? What are the civilizing influences that prevent us from doing that? Because sure, I'm a terrible misanthropist, that I don't like people much, or it's only a small percentage of people do I like. And there are every day you see somebody, you meet somebody, you're talking to somebody that you just want to punch in the throat. And, but we don't. I've never actually killed a person except in my wish fulfillment. And that list would take the entire rest of the podcast to go through, hundreds of people. So, and it brings us to the point of what we all do. We're fiction writers, and we write about basically getting rid of people. Why? Because we can't in real life. We shouldn't. We know that. We're civilized people. Readers as a whole are. Readers are the most thoughtful and civilized people that you'll meet. And so why do we like to see justice handed out in this manner? And it's got to be because deep down, we want to do that. We know we shouldn't, but it is so satisfying to see it done. So in a literal sense, I don't kill anybody except certain insects. In a wish fulfillment way, yeah, I'm Pol Pot.
What about you, Andrew?
Yeah, well, to kind of reverse the answers in fiction, in the fiction that we produce, yeah, I mean the body count. I've staggered to think what it would be. All the way back to my very first book many years ago. It opened with the discovery of a dead body, and so I guess had I killed that person or not? I mean, in a way, since I invented that scenario, but it was not long after leaving the company that I'd worked for, and I was just not cut out for the corporate world at all, and so there were many people who didn't like me and I didn't like, and so that first, the opening page, somebody dead in an absolute squalid, disgusting situation in an alleyway in New York City, and I made sure that that person essentially was one of these guys from work. So it was that was very satisfying. It took many years to work my way through all of the big store of people, but it was a very funny thing because I guess a lot of people read fiction, particularly crime fiction, because they get a sort of release from the fictional outcome. And I used to do karate back in those days, and I would when I had a regular job, if you were at the class and you were getting tired and you were getting worn out, and all you had to do was just think about something from that day, think about somebody that you work with, and instantly your sort of lethal instincts came out again and you could keep going. But after a while of being an author, I found that had disappeared. If I was getting tired, I'd kind of cast back to, okay, well, who really pissed me off today? And it'd be like, well, anybody that did would already be dead on the page. I wasn't coming in contact with people, so that was kind of fun. But in real life, I mean, it's sad really, because we live, as you mentioned earlier, on a nature preserve. So we are in the middle of nowhere. We're basically in a forest. And one of the problems with being so remote is that you're surrounded by creatures. I mean, it's not as bad as Australia, where everything that you come across wants to kill you. But we have the problem that everything you come across wants to come into your house and essentially destroy it. And so the one animal in particular we have real trouble with here are pack rats. And I'd never come across them before. I don't know if they just don't exist in England or if they're just not a particular problem wherever I'd lived before. But these things, I don't know if you've ever come across them. I
don't even know what they look like. Do they look like a rat?
They look like a rat, only an incredibly cute kind of Disneyfied one. They basically look like a really sweet family pet. But they are disgusting. They're filthy. They spread disease. They leave like a smeary goo everywhere they go. They eat everything. They collect things. They take things and put them in their nests. And if they decide to make that nest in your house, not only are they leaving this disgusting slime everywhere, but they're dragging disgusting slimy objects everywhere. So you have to get rid of them. You cannot let them take hold, because before you know it, there'll be an entire colony in there. And so different people around the area have different approaches to them. Some people put out poison. Some people have these electric traps that the animals will go in and get electrocuted. But the problem is there are tons of animals around that are really nice. The chipmunks are lovely, the ground squirrels, all these other kind of things. And I don't want to be harming those. I only want to, get rid of the ones that are going to damage the house or would make us sick. So I use live traps, so that if you catch somebody that is benevolent or benign, you can let them go again. And in fact, as an aside, the different animals you catch, they respond so differently. Sometimes you'll have a chipmunk and they're really frightened. Sometimes it'll be a squirrel and they're really angry. But there's this one little mouse, we've named him Trevor. And Trevor actually loves going in these traps because he goes in, there's a mound of peanut butter bigger than him. And as soon as he starts eating it, the door closes so that he's safe. No one can come and eat him. And so whereas the other animals, if they're not a pack rat, if you want to release them, you open the door and they shoot out, like a champagne cork. Trevor hangs onto the side with his tiny little claws. It's like, no, I haven't finished the peanut butter yet. Don't throw me out. So in the end, we actually got an extra trap so that as soon as we put him out, Trevor will go in, it'll close, he can be there all night eating his peanut butter, and there's still traps available for the things that we need to catch. And so if you catch a pack rat, I mean, on the one hand, you kind of relieved that you've caught one because you needed to and it was destroying everything, but then you have to do something about it. And they just look so ridiculously cute. It's just horrible to have to then go and dispose of them. But that's the only thing. Yeah, as Lee was saying, huge sort of disproportionate balance between what gets killed off in the books and in real life.
And you can't kill off a cute little Disney creature. You just can't.
No.
Oh, I bet he does. That's my brother, Andrew. Those cute.
Well, they have to go. And I mean, do you remember this, Lee? When we were kids, there was a problem with rats under the garden shed. And our father would somehow go around behind it and poke around underneath. And when the rats came out, we were supposed to whack them with cricket bats. Do you remember that?
Yeah. That's how we had our pocket money on a Saturday morning.
No.
It was like for a head of rat, and you would get like a halfpenny for each one, and you would end up with like 3 or 4 pence, and you would then go to this candy store, and back in those days you get a decent amount of candy for that money. So that was our dad. He was very efficient. He never gave away anything for free.
So killers for hire. That's
right.
That's how it all started for you.
We were brought up to it. We're helpless victims of our upbringing.
I love it. All right, so let's talk about reacher and exit strategy. I guess my first question is 30 books in, they've 30 stories of this guy. What still surprises you about Reacher? Are there moments where he reacts in ways that you don't see coming?
The first thing that always, when I was writing them, the first puzzle, the thing you had to figure out was how to get him involved, because he's a loner. He lives alone. He wanders. He's perfectly happy with his solitude. He is not proactive. He is not looking to save the world. He is just hopefully going to have a nice day. And so, I always kidded people that, I write 364 novels where nothing happens. He just has a nice day. And then one day something happens, and that's the novel that gets published. But how do you start it off? That is the perpetual problem with a loner. He doesn't have a job. He's not a cop. He's not a private eye. There is no structure that obliges him to do anything. And so how do you get him involved? And what I loved about Exit Strategy was, right there on page 1, or at least in the opening sequence, he gets involved in a way that is completely unpredictable. In other words, somebody approaches him secretly, slips this note into his pocket. And if I'd been writing that, I would have thought, oh, phew, we're off to the races in a way that makes sense, and it's different than anything we've done before, because a lot of it is always just wrong place, wrong time. Mm-hmm. And or there's usually a coincidence, and that is always a big deal plotting wise. But I believe the reader gives you one go. You can have the coincidence at the beginning where he's next to somebody on the street who's getting kidnapped or this or that. They'll buy one outrageous thing, and then you better make the rest of the story make total sense. But I loved the way Exit Strategy started because it was fresh. It was something, it was new. I hadn't done that before. We hadn't done that before. It was a great way of doing it.
Yeah, and I like that it was a mistaken identity too, right? It was the wrong
Yeah, it
person
was a double
delivering
layer.
the
It
note
was
in.
It was the wrong guy.
yeah, putting the note in the wrong guy's pocket, and that sparks an entire story. I mean, this
Yeah.
like 500 pages comes out of that one incident.
It does, and it brings out. It all hinges around. That was the coincidence. That was the mechanism. But then it all hinges around Reacher's character, because having found that note in his pocket, he could have just thrown it away. He could have said, "Well, this has nothing to do with me. I don't know why that guy slipped it into my pocket. It was a mistake." He could have thrown it away and just left. But because Reacher has this overriding moral code about him that says, if somebody's in trouble and I can help him, then he feels an obligation to do it. So it all, not only is it the mechanism that gets this, it's like the clockwork mechanism that you wind up that sets the story in motion. It also illuminates Reacher himself, because one aspect of this being the 30th book is that you're going to have a lot of people who have been with Reacher from the beginning, and like I was before I started working with Lee, looking forward to the next installment every year. But also there's going to be, we hope, new people coming to the series, and so if they're coming to it new, how do you show them who Reacher is in a way that isn't going to make everybody who's already read 29 other books bored, thinking, oh, we've got to sit through that again. So you need things that illuminate him without making it really kind of clunky and boring for people who are already familiar.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked a little bit about Reacher's moral compass. Is there a line that he would never cross, even in the worst possible scenario? And have you ever been tempted as writers to make him cross that line?
That is it's a great question, because there's a sort of there's a previous stage to answering that question, which is, do you set him up into a situation where he has to make a choice like that? And generally speaking, I haven't done that. Would he kill a child? Obviously not. So I've never started down that road. But he's killed women. He's a completely equal opportunity avenger. It doesn't matter who the person is. But yeah, I think there's a huge balance for thriller writers, that you've got to be wild, you've got to be uncompromising, of course, especially a genre like Reacher's, the sort of lone wolf type of untrammeled. Yeah, there's a moral code, there's a heart of gold, but no legal niceties whatsoever. So who is going to be the victim? And in a lot of ways, that's predetermined, because you just aim down a road where it's obviously a bad guy. But yeah, are there lengths to which he wouldn't go? I think not. I think that readers love that. Because real life is something that we read fiction in order to escape, and real life is so full of you shouldn't do this, you can't do that. It is. We are on a civilized track, which is, of course, admirable and necessary and so on, but it's frustrating a lot of the time and annoying, especially when criminals get off on a technicality or something. So that readers love to see it happen directly and brutally and uncompromisingly, but you pre-select so that you're not going down a road that is going to really, really upset people. Reacher would never kill a dog. And that is something that is, you've got to work to avoid that, because obviously dogs are used as security weapons. They're used as guard dogs and so on. If you're approaching a compound, there's a dog on the other side of the fence. What do you do with it? Reacher's not going to shoot it. He's going to work out a different way of getting past it.
Yeah. So I think it's a sort of question that, it's almost got two answers, because would he ever would he ever cross his own line, a line that he has imposed himself based on his beliefs? Absolutely not. But then is there any limit once if you imagine a kind of a divided highway with all the things on one side that he has decided himself that he would never do? Yeah, he'd never do those. But then on the other side of the barrier, anything goes. Anything that is needed to defeat the bad guys and make sure that right wins the day, he will do. It doesn't matter how brutal or how uncompromising, he will not flinch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's part of what readers love so much about him.
Yeah, and the dog thing is a bit of a cliche in crime fiction, because the rule is don't kill the dog.
Never.
I did have a bad guy kill a dog, and my God, people were so they hated that guy because of that. And so Reacher could have torn his arms off and beaten him to death with them, and they would have been cheering him on.
That's a true villain right there.
Yeah.
And I love that. It's about, as an aside, if you think back to the James Bond books, the books rather than the movies, you always could tell who the villain was early because of some moral transgression. It would be that the person had cheated at cards or had cheated at golf, something that, you later on found out about the diabolical scheme that they were a part of, but you immediately knew that they were the bad guy because they'd done this, they'd gone beyond the pale in that way. So it's kind of funny to see there are variations of that from different eras, aren't there? And so, what Lee's describing is what's contemporary with Reacher, but you can see the same principle for way back in time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we are ready for the giveaway. We could talk all day about this amazing book, but brothers Lee and Andrew are giving away 2 copies of Exit Strategy to lucky US viewers. It doesn't matter where you're watching. We scour the comments everywhere we stream, but please make sure to shout out where you're from when you answer this question. And the question is, with the release of Exit Strategy, how many Reacher books will there be in the series?
And I tried to throw you off with that one.
Listen to Lee, right? So,
and no cheating, you guys. Everybody answer your
phone. I know. Yeah. I'm a writer. I'm not a mathematician.
Clearly, I'm not.
Okay, the Killers are big fans of independent booksellers, and we want to send all the support we can. We have 2 bookstores to shout out tonight. Lee has chosen Strand Books in New York as his killer store tonight, and Andrew has chosen The Poisoned Pen. Can you guys tell us why you love these stores so much?
Well, there's 2 Strands in New York. There's the massive one down on Broadway, which is, they have a slogan, 18 miles of shelves. And I'm sure that is out of date now. And that is it's a huge, enormous bookstore. And it is an indie, and I love it. But the one I'm going for, it has a branch up on the Upper West Side on Columbus Avenue, a much smaller, a sort of neater looking store. It was very close to my previous apartment, and I would go there a couple, 3, 4 times a week, just see what's new. I love books. I cannot get past the fact that I love books, and I cannot walk past a bookstore without going in, and I can't go in a bookstore without buying at least 2, 3 books. And so you got to think, what do you want from a bookstore? Well, first of all, you want, I think, friendly and knowledgeable staff. Because that is the greatest thing about an independent bookstore, is that their stock is usually wide, but they have deep knowledge of it. And so if you go in there and say, I love the Reacher books, but I've read them all, so what else do you think I should look at? They will give you a detailed list. They will say, well, this is great, or that is great. Try this, try that. And the Strand on Columbus Avenue is great at that. And it's a lovely, friendly, atmosphere. It is just even if it's 5 minutes here and there, it's the best 5 minutes of your day.
I love that.
Yeah, and I went with the Poison Pen in Scottsdale, Arizona, largely because of the support that they give and have given for decades to authors, particularly authors who are just starting out, because we all know that it's a difficult road to hoe being an author. It's not easy. It tends to be a fight and a struggle step of the way, and these guys are there, and they will help and support. And what we've noticed is that, particularly kind of post-COVID, there used to be a lot more opportunities to go and do in-person events and to meet readers, and because at the end of the day, it's the readers' opinions that count. It doesn't matter what we think of each other; it matters what the readers think. And to get to meet them and find out firsthand is so valuable. And particularly since COVID, there are fewer and fewer opportunities to do that. But despite that, and despite all the logistical difficulties of getting books to be signed and all of the other things that go into a successful event that you don't see because they're all taken care of behind the scenes, the guys at the Poison Pen consistently make it happen for authors, particularly new authors starting out. So I really think that is so important and so valuable. So shout out to them for having done that.
Totally agree. Yeah, and we'll drop the links to Order Exit Strategy in the comments so you guys can find the books from these great independent bookstores.
For sure. So obviously the Killers love to read, and we love it when you share what you're reading in our Facebook group, post pictures, write reviews, ask for recommendations, and give yours. Tonight, though, we want to know, Andrew and Lee, what are you guys currently reading?
Well, before I was a writer, I was just a reader. And in fact, all writers are obviously much more of a reader than they are a writer. We typically write one book a year, maybe two, but we read, some people read 50, some people read 100. I read hundreds of books a year. And I used to love the randomness that you could just, without any pre-knowledge, you would just stumble across a great book. And that would happen quite often. But when you get into the business, there is no more randomness, because we all talk, we all hear from our publishers and the trade press, what's new, what's exciting. It's impossible to ever have dinner with a publisher without hearing about 5 books that they're just really excited about. So in a way, I miss that randomness. So what I love to do is just either literally find books lying around or just hear random comments. And somebody just randomly recommended a book from a couple of decades ago. It's called Incident at 20 Mile. And the author is a one-word name, Trevanian. And I'm really, really enjoying that. It is a story about isolated people in an isolated place, and a total random discovery, which to me adds a lot somehow. It's mine. I've discovered it. Nobody else knows about it. It is a joy to literally stumble across a book and love it. I've found books in the pockets on airplane seats, that people have forgotten. And those are great. If you just randomness, I love it. And it's increasingly hard to find, with the internet and what you guys are doing, directing people towards books is wonderful. And a lot of people need that and want that. But for me, I like something that nobody's ever heard of and I found by accident.
Yeah. That's always such a joy.
Well, I would like to cheat a little bit and talk about 2 books, because I was reading one, and then I paused because I was given a pre-publication copy of a book that actually was written by 2 of my friends. So I read that book, but I finished it. And so technically, what am I reading? I'm back to the one that I was reading before, but the one that the pre-publication. So I don't have a copy of it. I can't show you a picture, but like I'm not even sure when it comes out. It's later this year, but it's definitely one to watch out for. The name on the jacket, the author name is going to be Linda Keir. It's a combination of these two people's names, and it's a thriller called "I Did Not Kill My Husband," and it's just a fantastic book. It involves a woman who has been convicted of murdering her husband. She protests her innocence. Nobody will listen. Various aspects about her lifestyle make it that she's vilified in the popular press and in the online media, social media. So she's having a pretty tough time. It's the classic example of somebody who had everything in their world and then it was all torn away. So what are they going to do in order to survive and to redeem themselves? And so there's a coincidental episode that leads to her escaping, and then she's on the run. So it has all kinds of classic elements. It's extremely funny. It's wittily written. You've got the real finger on the pulse because of the way that social media is used and the influencing. You know, everything these days is about what you've got on TikTok and everything else. So it's really on top of all of that. But it also has a real classic foundation of, you know, somebody is on the run, a regular person in extraordinary circumstances. How do they survive? How do they stay ahead of the police and the other authorities that are chasing them? And it has a brilliant mystery aspect to it too, because the idea is that she has been found guilty of this crime, but is she? You know, is there an alternative? And what will the real explanation be? So I think it was a fantastic book. So you know, I'm looking forward to it being available and out on the shelves. But the one that I paused and I'm now back to is completely different because, you know, like Lee, I just like reading. I never set out to read a particular kind of book. I just see, well, what grabs my attention, what seems interesting. And so it's been out for a little while. I came across it a while ago, and it's really the opposite end of the spectrum. If I Did Not Kill My Husband by Linda Keir is just pure enjoyment, this book is actually pretty hard because it's called Killing Thatcher. It's a non-fiction book. It centers around, it's by an author called Rory Carroll, who did a fantastic job of research and then also presenting everything that he discovered in a really accessible way. And it goes back to the sort of political landscape of Lee and my sort of formative years, because there was an episode in the 1980s where the IRA tried to kill the British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. It didn't actually work. Other people got injured, but she survived. And so it takes that as the focal episode, but it really goes back and it looks at the roots of the conflict that led to people wanting to murder the Prime Minister. And a lot of the, you know, if it was fiction, you'd call it fieldcraft. You know, what went into the campaign, what went into the authorities, their attempts to prevent it. How was it? You know, how did it happen? How did they get away with it? And so it's quite a hard read because a lot of brutal and horrible things happen, and something about reading about brutal, horrible things that actually happen to people is different to reading about fictional things. So it's not easy. It's not what you necessarily do for enjoyment, but it's very, very informative and, you know, really quite gripping. And it's the sort of thing that you really, you know, once you start, you really have to see it through.
Yeah.
That's great.
Okay. Well, look up those 3 books, you guys. And speaking of great reads, we have a Killer Author Club alumni to celebrate tonight. Kate Holohan's new thriller, The Kidnapping of Alice Ingold, was an Amazon first reads and is now on shelves everywhere. I've read it. It's fantastic. It's a harrowing abduction becomes a tantalizing nationwide scavenger hunt in this twisty and ingenious novel of suspense by one of my co-authors, Killer alum and USA Today bestselling author Kate Holohan. She's giving 3 copies to US viewers. So drop a comment if you would like to be considered and tell us where you're from.
And we also have 2 fabulous new releases we want to celebrate tonight. First, we have Cosplay to Death by the author who writes about a quiet coastal town that is plunged into chaos when the bodies of a competitive surfer and a famous cosplayer wash ashore on the beach. And that is by Ellie Joffrey. And then next we have Sisters in the Wind by Angeline Booley. And this one is about foster teen Lucy Smith discovers that she is of the Ojibwe heritage and has a family she never knew existed. But past secrets come back to haunt her, threatening her newfound shot at happiness. Ellie is giving away 1 copy of Cosplay to Death to U.S. viewers, and Angeline is giving away 1 copy of Sisters in the Wind to a lucky viewer from the U.S. or Canada. Comment if you want in and tell us where you're from. Good luck. And because we're all about shamelessly plugging our own murdery fun, don't miss the Killer's latest reads.
That's right. Kara's We Were Never Friends is about a sorority reunion that takes a very, very dark turn. Pre-order now before the party gets started.
That's right. And speaking of deadly parties, Heather's serving up the perfect host, an over-the-top gender reveal party that explodes in more ways than one, coming in November. Pre-order now.
And finally, Kimberly's taking you on a deadly European getaway in the expat affair. 2 Americans, the glittering diamond trade, in danger in Amsterdam.
That's right. So if you guys hang out on Facebook, sorry.
Just congratulations to you 3 and the other authors you mentioned. I mean, what a wonderful world where we just have this absolute river of great stuff to read.
So many stories.
Yes.
So many good ones.
It's amazing. I know we wish we could shout out everybody. So if you hang out on Facebook, come join our secret lair, the private members only Killer Author Club. Every episode, we draw a name from the hat for some killer swag, t-shirts, mugs, candles, you name it, we've got it. So jump in, join the fun, and peek at all the goods over at killerauthorclub.com. Tonight's winner is Jean Side. Yay. So Jean, congratulations. Please send one of us killers your address and we'll send some swag your way. And if you want to be the next winner, come on and join us. Links coming up in the comments. And also a big killer thanks to Book Reporter for sharing the murder you love. Stay up to date on all book news and events at bookreporter.com.
That's right. So Lee and Andrew, we have some excellent news for you both. You have survived the Killer Author Club. Whew.
It's a relief. It was touch and go there for a few moments. So.
I think it was. So tell us where our listeners and viewers can find you online.
Oh, I have no idea about stuff like that. There are people who do it for me.
Where's your publicist when you need him or her?
Just Google Jack Reacher. You'll find something there, I'm sure. It's I started out in the old days. I used to mail my manuscripts in email. Had not really even been invented yet. It was I struggle to keep up. Andrew's much better at this stuff than me. He's a genuine 21st century guy. I'm basically a 20th century guy, and I'll never catch up.
Question is, do you want to catch up? But I think that the best starting point would just be jackreacher.com, and I'm also on social media. I'm on I guess Instagram. I'm APG1632, I think. Although it's a long time since I've posted anything. But yeah, I think just some Google searching should turn up most of it.
Perfect. Well, that's a wrap for tonight's episode. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll be back in 2 weeks with the wonderful Jilly McMillan in the Killer Hot Seat, spilling all the details on her newest thriller, The Burning Library. Until then, you can catch us wasting entirely too much time on Instagram, Facebook, and occasionally TikTok. For the full schedule, past episodes, recipes, merch, head to killerauthorclub.com. And thanks for being part of the club.
Good night.
Good night.
That does it for tonight's show. Thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to catch our next show live, we're every other Tuesday night on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. For times, upcoming schedule, and to catch up on past episodes, visit us at killerauthorclub.com. Happy reading. Now get on out there and kill that TBR.